As punishment, the family sent the widowed woman to the cowboy, but she became his greatest treasure. The town had already decided her fate long before she understood it herself. After her husband's death, people stopped looking at her the same way. Their eyes no longer held kindness, only whispers, doubt, and quiet blame. Some said she brought bad luck. Others said she was the reason her husband never returned from his last journey. No one had proof, but in that small town, truth mattered less than rumors. Her late husband's family was the harshest of all. They never liked her, and now they had the excuse they needed. One cold morning, without much warning, they told her she could no longer stay. "She brings misfortune," one of them said firmly. "It's better for everyone if she leaves." Another agreed. And just like that, her life in the town ended. But they didn't simply send her away with nothing. Instead, they made a strange decision, one that felt more like punishment than kindness. Far beyond the town, past dry lands and empty roads, lived a cowboy. A man known for his silence, his rough nature, and his complete distance from people. No one knew much about him, and that was exactly how he liked it. They sent her to him. "She can live there," they said, "if he allows it." No one asked if she agreed. The journey was long and quiet. She sat in the back of a worn-out wagon, holding the small bundle of her belongings. The wind was cold, but she didn't complain. She had already learned that complaining would change nothing. She didn't cry either. Not because she wasn't hurt, but because she was too tired to show it. After hours of travel, the land began to change. The town disappeared behind them, replaced by wide-open plains. The sky looked endless, and the air felt heavier with silence. Finally, they stopped. "There," the driver said, pointing ahead. In the distance stood a small wooden house. It looked old but strong, like it had survived many storms. A few fences stood nearby, and a horse was tied beside them, the cowboy's home. The driver didn't wait long. He helped her down, placed her small bundle beside her, and quickly turned the wagon around. "Good luck," he said, but it didn't sound like he meant it. Then he was gone. She stood there alone. For a moment, she simply looked at the house. This was where her life had brought her. Not a home she chose, not a place she knew, just somewhere she had been sent. Taking a slow breath, she picked up her bundle and walked toward the door. Before she could knock, it opened. The cowboy stood there. He was taller than she expected, with a serious face and sharp eyes. His clothes were simple, covered in dust from work. He didn't look surprised to see her, but he didn't look pleased either. "So," he said slowly, his voice deep and calm, "they sent you." She nodded quietly. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. "I don't need anyone here," he added, "and I don't take in strangers." His words were clear, cold, but honest. She didn't argue. Instead, she looked down briefly, then back at him. "I understand," she said softly. "I won't cause trouble." Something in her voice made him pause. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger, it was something else, something steady. He studied her for a moment. She didn't look like trouble. She looked tired, but strong in a quiet way. Still, he wasn't convinced. "You can stay," he said finally, though his tone remained distant. "But only for a while, until you figure something else out." She nodded again. "Thank you." Inside, the house was simple. There wasn't much furniture, and everything looked used but clean. It felt more like a place for survival than comfort. He showed her a small corner where she could rest. "That's all I've got," he said. "It's enough," she replied. And she meant it. That night, the wind outside grew louder, moving across the empty land like a restless spirit. Inside the house, silence filled every space. They ate in quiet. He sat on one side of the table, she on the other. No conversation, no questions. Just two strangers sharing the same room. But something had already changed. The cowboy, who had lived alone for so long, now felt the presence of another person in his home. It was unfamiliar and uncomfortable. The widowed woman, who had lost everything, now sat in a place where she did not belong, but had nowhere else to go. Neither of them wanted this, and yet neither of them walked away. Outside, the wind continued to blow. Inside, two lives had quietly begun to cross paths, whether they were ready for it or not. The next morning came early on the open land. Before the sun fully rose, the cowboy was already outside, working as he always did, feeding the horse, checking the fence, and preparing for the long day ahead. His life followed the same routine every day, quiet, simple, and alone. But this morning was different. There was someone else inside his house. He tried not to think about it. Inside, the widowed woman woke slowly. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar, the air colder than what she was used to. Then it all came back. She was no longer in the town, she was here, in a stranger's home. She sat up, quietly folding the thin blanket she had used. Even though no one told her to, she placed it neatly aside. It was a small habit she had learned, keeping things in order, even when life itself was not. When she stepped outside, she saw him near the fence, fixing a broken piece of wood. He noticed her but said nothing. She hesitated for a moment, then walked a little closer. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked gently. He didn't answer right away. He kept working, as if he hadn't heard her. But after a few seconds, he spoke. "There's water to carry from the well," he said without looking at her. She nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "I'll do it." The work was not easy. The well was farther than it looked, and the bucket was heavy. Her hands were not used to this kind of labor, but she didn't complain. Step by step, she carried the water back. Then she went again, and again. The cowboy noticed. At first, he thought she would give up quickly. Most people would, but she didn't stop. She didn't ask for help. She didn't even slow down much. By midday, the buckets were full. Still, neither of them spoke. Days began to pass like this. Quiet mornings, long hours of work, silent meals. But slowly, small changes started to appear. The house, once plain and empty, began to feel different. She cleaned corners that had been forgotten. She fixed small things that had been broken for a long time. Even the table looked better, with care, she quietly added. The cowboy noticed these things, even if he didn't say it. One evening, as he entered the house, he paused. The place felt warmer. Not because of fire, but because someone had cared enough to change it. He looked at her for a moment. She was sitting quietly, mending a piece of cloth. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. She looked up. "I wanted to," she replied simply. He didn't know what to say after that, so he said nothing. Despite the quiet, something was slowly growing between them. Not friendship, not yet, but something close to understanding. She learned his ways, how he liked things, how he worked, when he preferred silence. She didn't ask questions about his past, and he didn't ask about hers. It was an unspoken rule, and it worked. One afternoon, the wind grew stronger than usual. Dark clouds gathered in the sky, and the air felt heavy. A storm was coming. The cowboy moved quickly, securing what he could. He expected to do everything alone, like always. But this time, she followed him. "Hold this," he said, handing her a rope without thinking. She took it immediately. Together, they worked. The wind pushed hard against them, but she stood firm. Even when her hands hurt, she didn't let go. Even when the dust made it hard to see, she stayed beside him. For the first time, he truly looked at her, not as a stranger, but as someone standing with him. Not weak, not a burden, strong. When the storm passed, both of them were tired. They sat outside, a little distance apart, catching their breath. The land was quiet again. After a long silence, he spoke. "You're not like what they said." She turned slightly, surprised. "They said you brought trouble," he continued. "But I don't see it." She didn't smile. "They didn't want me there," she said softly. "It was easier to blame me." He nodded slowly. He understood more than he showed. That night, something felt different again. The silence between them was still there, but it was no longer heavy. It was calmer, safer. They still didn't talk much. They still kept their distance. But the space between them no longer felt like a wall. It felt like something that could slowly be crossed. The cowboy, who once wanted to be left alone, now found himself noticing her absence when she was not nearby. And the widowed woman, who had been pushed away from everything, began to feel not welcome yet, but not unwanted either. Neither of them said it, but both of them felt it. Something was changing, slowly, quietly, and neither of them knew where it would lead. The peaceful days did not last forever. Life on the open land was never easy, and soon, trouble arrived again, but this time, it did not come from people. It came from nature. The air began to change first. The wind grew colder, sharper than before. The sky stayed gray for days, and the land felt restless. Even the horse became uneasy, moving more than usual. The cowboy noticed it immediately. "A hard season is coming," he said one evening, his voice serious. The widowed woman looked outside. The clouds were thick, covering the sky like a heavy blanket. "What should we do?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He was already thinking. "We prepare," he said finally. The next few days were full of work, more than before. They gathered wood, fixed the fence again, and stored whatever food they had left. The cowboy worked fast, his movements sharp and focused, and as always, she worked beside him. No complaints, no fear shown. But inside, she knew this would not be easy. Then the storm came. It started at night. The wind howled loudly, shaking the walls of the house. The sky roared, and heavy rain began to fall. It was not like the small storms before. This one was stronger, longer, and harder to fight. Inside the house, the fire struggled to stay alive. The cowboy stood near the door, listening carefully. "The fence won't hold," he said. Before she could respond, he grabbed his coat and moved toward the door. "I'll go fix it." She stood up quickly. "I'll come with you." He stopped. "No. Stay inside." "It's too strong for one person," she replied, her voice steady. For a moment, they looked at each other. Then, without another word, he nodded. Outside, the storm was even worse. The wind pushed against them, making it hard to walk. Rain hit their faces, cold and sharp. The ground was slippery, and the darkness made everything harder to see. But they kept going. The fence had already started to break. One side had fallen, and the horse was moving nervously nearby. "Hold the rope," he shouted over the wind. She grabbed it tightly, her hands shaking but strong. He worked quickly, trying to fix the broken wood, but the storm made everything harder. Every time he secured one part, the wind pushed against another. Still, they didn't stop. She held the rope steady, even when it burned her hands. She didn't let go, not once. After what felt like hours, the fence was strong enough to hold. "Back inside," he called. They rushed back to the house, both soaked and tired. Inside, the fire had almost gone out. She moved quickly, adding wood and bringing it back to life. He stood there for a moment, catching his breath. For the first time, neither of them stayed silent. "You should have stayed inside," he said, though his voice was not harsh. "And leave you alone?" she replied. He didn't argue. The storm continued through the night, but inside, something had changed. They sat closer to the fire this time, not across the room, not far apart, just close enough to share warmth. After a long silence, she spoke. "They sent me here because they didn't want me anymore." Her voice was soft, but clear. "They said I brought bad luck, that everything went wrong because of me." The cowboy listened quietly. "I tried to explain," she continued, "but no one listened. It was easier for them to believe the worst." She looked down at her hands. "I lost my home, not because I did something wrong, but because they needed someone to blame." The room grew quiet again. Then the cowboy spoke. "I know what that feels like." She looked up, surprised. "I chose to be alone," he said. "After I lost people I cared about, I thought it was better not to get close to anyone again." He paused. It felt safer. For the first time, they were not just two people sharing space. They were two people sharing truth. The storm outside slowly began to calm, but inside, something stronger had formed. Understanding. The next morning, the land looked different. The storm had passed, but it had left its mark. Parts of the fence were damaged, the ground was wet, and the sky was still gray. But the house stood strong, and so did they. They stepped outside together, looking at the work ahead. Without speaking, they began to fix what was broken, together. From that day on, things were no longer the same. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was comfortable. They worked side by side, not as strangers forced to live together, but as partners facing the same life. The cowboy no longer saw her as someone sent to him, and the widowed woman no longer felt like she didn't belong. Trust had begun to grow, slowly but strongly, and neither of them wanted to lose it. After the storm, life did not return to what it once was. It became better, not easier, but stronger. The land slowly healed. The broken fence was repaired piece by piece. The ground dried under the sun and the sky cleared again. The horse calmed and the wind returned to its usual quiet movement across the plains. But the biggest change was not outside. It was inside the small wooden house. The cowboy no longer woke up to silence. Now, there were soft sounds in the morning, the movement of someone preparing the day, the quiet steps across the floor, the small signs of life that once did not exist there. At first, he thought it would bother him, but it didn't. In fact, when those sounds were missing, something felt wrong. The widowed woman also felt the change. She no longer moved like someone who was afraid of being told to leave. Her steps were more certain. Her eyes no longer carried the same sadness as before. She was still quiet. But now, her silence was peaceful. One afternoon, while they worked near the fence, a rider appeared in the distance. The cowboy noticed him first. "Someone's coming," he said. She turned, watching as the figure slowly came closer. As the rider approached, her face changed. She recognized him. He was from her old town. The man stopped a few steps away and looked at her with surprise. "So, you're still here," he said. His voice carried the same tone she remembered, cold, distant, and judging. The cowboy stood nearby, silent but watchful. "What do you want?" she asked calmly. The man hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Your husband's family sent me," he said. "They said you can come back." The words hung in the air. For a second, everything felt still. She looked at him carefully. "Why?" she asked. The man shifted slightly. "They need help," he admitted. "Things haven't been going well. The house is falling apart. They thought, maybe you could return and fix things." Fix things. The same people who blamed her, who sent her away without care, now wanted her back. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked around. At the land, at the house, at the life she had built here, slowly, quietly, with effort and strength. Then she looked at the cowboy. He didn't say anything, but his eyes showed something clear. He was waiting, not to decide for her, but to stand by whatever she chose. She turned back to the man. "I'm not coming back," she said. Her voice was calm, but firm. The man frowned. "You don't understand," he said. "They need you." She shook her head slightly. "They didn't need me before," she replied. "They only needed someone to blame." The man had no answer. "You can tell them," she continued, "that I'm not angry, but I'm not going back to a place where I was not wanted." Her words were simple, but strong. For the first time, she was not the person being pushed away. She was the one choosing where she belonged. The man looked at her one last time, then turned his horse. Without another word, he left. The dust from his horse slowly faded into the distance. Silence returned, but it was different now, lighter, clearer. The cowboy stepped closer. "You didn't even think twice," he said. She gave a small, soft smile. "I already have a place," she replied. He looked at her for a moment. Then, for the first time, he allowed himself to smile too. Just a little. Days passed, then weeks. Life continued. But now, everything felt settled. They worked together without needing to ask. They shared meals without distance. Sometimes they even spoke more. Small conversations, simple words, but meaningful. The house no longer felt empty. It felt like a home. One evening, as the sun began to set, they sat outside. The sky was painted in soft colors and the air was calm. The cowboy looked across the land, then spoke. "They sent you here as punishment," he said quietly. She nodded. "That's what they believed." He shook his head slightly. "They were wrong." She looked at him. "How?" He met her eyes. "Because you were never a burden," he said. "You were the best thing that came here." Her expression softened. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she said, "And you were not someone to fear." They sat there in silence again. But this silence was not empty. It was full of understanding, full of respect, full of something they had both been missing for a long time. The cowboy, who once chose to live alone, had found someone worth sharing his life with. And the widowed woman, who had been sent away as if she had no value, had found a place where she truly belonged. Not by force, not by need, but by choice. And in the end, what was meant to be punishment became something far greater. It became a new beginning, a quiet life, a strong bond, and a treasure neither of them ever expected to find.